There's a strange kind of prison built not from stone, but from thought. A place without walls, without guards, yet one that holds nearly every mind captive. This prison is made of paradoxes. Quiet traps hidden in the very structure of how you think, feel, and remember dot and the most dangerous part. You don't notice them. You wake believing the past is fixed. But your memory changes it. You make choices that were already decided before you knew. You seek control and end up losing it. These aren't abstract theories. Each of the 25 paradoxes we'll explore tonight has been observed in real life. In psychology labs, in neurological scans, in experiments repeated around the world. Some come from ancient philosophy, others from cutting-edge science. All of them live inside you, shaping how you move through the world, shaping who you think you are. You might assume your thoughts belong to you, that your feelings are signals from reality, that your attention is under your control. But what if those assumptions are themselves illusions? What if the more you try to break free, the tighter the trap becomes? In the next 2 hours, we'll walk through 25 mental traps that keep you powerless. These aren't ordinary mistakes. They're recursive patterns like mazes folded inside themselves. From the shortcut that takes longer, to the confidence that hides ignorance, to the voice that echoes long after silence has returned. You don't need to solve them. You don't need to escape. All you need to do is watch dot by simply noticing these paradoxes. You begin to loosen their hold. Awareness, strangely, is both the trap and the key. Imagine standing in front of two identical doors. Behind one, success. Behind the other, failure. You're told it's a 50-50 chance, but before your hand even reaches for the handle, something invisible tilts the odds. Your own expectation. In psychology, this is called the expectancy effect. It doesn't just influence gambling or guessing games. It shapes everything, from classroom performance to medical treatments, from business negotiations to everyday conversations. When a teacher quietly believes that a student is smarter, that student's performance tends to improve. When a patient believes a pill will cure them, even when it's just sugar, measurable healing begins. This is not superstition. It's not magic. It's biology. Expectations change brain chemistry. Hormone levels shift. Immune system responses adjust. Parts of the brain responsible for motivation, fear, attention all respond to mere belief. Here's where the paradox emerges. You think your beliefs respond to reality. But in truth, reality is responding to your beliefs. In one study, people were given identical wine but told it was expensive or cheap. Brain scans revealed that the wine labeled expensive actually triggered more pleasure, not just in thought, but in deep neural circuits tied to reward. Their belief rewrote their sensory experience. Expectation reaches beneath conscious thought. It alters muscle tension, breathing, posture. Tiny micro movements happen before you're even aware. Your body leans into success or away from it. Based on invisible scripts written by belief. In quantum physics, there's the observer effect. Observing a particle changes its behavior. But the human mind takes it one step further. You don't just observe your own life. You expect it. And in doing so, you help shape it. Think now about your own life, the goals you abandoned, the dreams you never began, the moments you didn't even try because something whispered, don't bother. It won't work. That whisper wasn't just doubt. It was a force changing the outcome before the first step. Now comes the most difficult part of this paradox. It works in both directions. If expectation can bend reality toward failure, it can bend it toward success, but your mind resists that. It clings to the idea that reality is fixed, separate, objective. That believing in success is naive. That trust in your own power is somehow foolish, yet every experiment says otherwise. Expectation isn't just a prediction, it's a mechanism. Even knowing this, you'll feel the pull of old expectations. That's part of the trap. The mind prefers the familiar shape of its own limits, But as we step deeper into this journey, understand the thought you hold before you act is not just a background noise. It is the first step. It's the quiet architect shaping everything that follows, the expectation that shapes the outcome. There's a certain kind of trap hidden in almost every modern life. You see it when you scroll your phone instead of finishing a task. You feel it when you avoid discomfort, choosing the easy path instead. It's the shortcut that takes longer. At first, it looks like common sense. Why struggle if there's an easier way? Why climb a mountain if there's a road around it? But psychology reveals something deeper. There's a mechanism in your brain, the effort paradox. Studies show that when people believe something requires less effort, they perform worse. In the long term, gym goers who take elevators to save energy burn fewer calories overall. Students who copy notes instead of writing them remember less. It's not just about lost time. It's about lost capacity. The human brain evolved to conserve energy, to avoid pain. But in a world where most dangers are imagined rather than real, that instinct backfires. It becomes a recursive loop. You avoid effort, so you get weaker, which makes effort feel harder, which makes you avoid effort more. In neuroscience, this shows up as decreased activation in the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain tied to discipline, future thinking, self-control. Shortcuts literally rewire your mind to expect less of itself. There's also a hidden cost, opportunity loss. Every easy path you take means a hard path you didn't walk. And those missed paths carry growth, strength, and skill you'll never gain. Think about it now. The choices you've made this week. Where did you take the shortcut? Was it in work, in relationships, and learning something new? And where did that shortcut quietly stretch time out, turning a small problem into a bigger one? One small example. A man procrastinates on fixing a leaky pipe. It's easier to ignore it for a day, for a week. But as time passes, the leak worsens, mold grows, costs rise. What started as a 5-minute fix becomes a 5-hour repair. The shortcut took longer. Now, imagine this principle expanded across your entire life. Every easy escape creating a slow erosion. Here's where the paradox sharpens. The brain experiences relief when it avoids effort. Dopamine is released. But that relief is borrowed from the future. By taking the shortcut you quietly enter into. Debt. A debt paid later in stress, regret, and stagnation. It's not just psychology. Philosophers describe this in different terms. Nietzsche spoke of eternal recurrence, the idea that small actions echo forever. Every time you choose ease over effort, that choice repeats in your character. Even your body reflects it. Muscles atrophy when unused. The body grows weaker from rest. The shortcut that takes longer isn't just a habit. It's a structure. And once it's built, it's hard to escape. The easy path becomes the only path your mind sees, but there is a way out, not by forcing yourself to always take the hard road, but by becoming aware of the quiet moment before the choice. The breath before the shortcut. If you can catch yourself there, even once, the pattern begins to crack. One experiment showed that simply asking people to reflect for 10 seconds before making a decision changed the outcome. Reflection reactivates the prefrontal cortex. It brings the hidden loop into the light. So right now, as you listen, notice the shape of your own life. Where have you taken the shortcut that stretched time? Where have you chosen ease and found yourself stuck? You're not trapped forever, but the first step is to see the trap, to feel the pull toward the shortcut, and to pause. And that pause is the real path forward. The shortcut that takes longer only wins when you're too busy running to notice where you're going. And as we continue this journey, keep watching for it. The quiet moment before the decision. The fork in the road that no one else can see, but that you now know is always there. Imagine standing in front of a mirror. You look into your own eyes, studying yourself. You see your face, your posture, your expression. But here's the trap. The moment you observe yourself too closely, something vanishes. The natural flow. The unfiltered self. Psychology calls this phenomenon self-consciousness interference. The more aware you become of your own actions, the more disrupted they become. Musicians who suddenly think too hard about their hands forget how to play. Public speakers who start focusing on every word stumble. Athletes miss shots they've made 1,000 times before. Awareness is supposed to give us control. But there is a paradox hidden in that very control. The more you watch yourself, the less yourself you become. In neuroscience. This is reflected in the default mode network, DMN, and task positive network, TPN. When you act naturally, the DMN operates quietly in the background, regulating self-image and memory. But as soon as self-awareness kicks in, the TPN activates and the balance shifts. Too much TPN and the mind becomes tangled in itself. Think about it like walking on a tightrope. Balance isn't maintained by staring at your own feet. It's maintained by trusting the body's automatic systems. Now expand that idea to every day. Life, relationships, creativity, personal growth. When you constantly monitor yourself, asking, am I doing this right? Do I look okay? What will they think? You block the very flow you need to move forward. This isn't just social. Anxiety, even in private, over-observation causes fragmentation. Experiments show that people solving puzzles while watching themselves in a mirror perform worse than those solving the same puzzles. Unseen. The paradox becomes sharper when applied to meditation. You meditate to become more aware, yet the deepest states of meditation involve losing self-awareness entirely, a state called no mind or flow. Awareness without observation. It's like light in quantum physics. The double-slit experiment proves that observing particles changes their behavior. Photons behave as waves until you measure them. The moment you watch too closely, reality collapses into something smaller, less free. The same applies to you. So, where does that leave us? Is awareness always a trap? Not quite. It's about knowing when to look and when to let go. There's a quiet moment before action where observation helps. Before a decision, before a risk, but once the path is chosen, observation must step aside. Trust must take over. Psychologists call this automaticity. Mastery in any field comes from letting practice skills flow without interference. The real trap isn't in watching. It's in believing you must watch all the time. The self becomes a hall of mirrors, endlessly reflecting itself until no clear image remains. Now pause for a moment. Think about your own life. Where do you overwatch yourself? Where has awareness become paralysis? Perhaps in speaking your truth, perhaps in starting something new, perhaps in simply moving through the day without second-guessing every step. The awareness that disappears when observed is not a flaw. It's part of how consciousness protects itself from overload. Imagine if you had to consciously think about every heartbeat, every breath, every blink. You would break down. The mind divides. It's labor. Some things remain below awareness, flowing naturally. Others rise to the surface only when needed. The paradox teaches us balance. Awareness must be used like a lens, not a mirror. Pointed outward when necessary, but set aside when flow is required. And as we move now into the next paradox, keep that lens in mind. Watch without watching too hard. Let thought move without freezing it in place. Because the moment you cling to awareness is the moment it slipped through your fingers. Imagine standing at the edge of a diving board. Below you, clear, deep water. You tell yourself, jump. Your body tenses. Muscles lock. But the longer you stand there, thinking about it, the harder it becomes to move. This is the paradox of the action that freezes you. It isn't just fear. It's a real psychological mechanism called action paralysis. The more the mind focuses on a single decision, especially under pressure, the more the body locks itself in place. In experiments, people faced with urgent choices, like pulling a lever to prevent harm in a simulation, often hesitate too long. They freeze, not because they don't know what to do, but because their brain is caught between multiple competing signals. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for conscious decision-making, sends one command. The motor cortex waits for confirmation. But when these signals loop, a standoff occurs. And in that standoff, nothing happens that it feels like standing in place while time slips away, even in everyday life. The same pattern appears. Think about moments when you had a hard conversation to start, a risk to take, a truth to tell. You knew the action, yet you waited. And the longer you waited, the harder it became. Neuroscientists describe this as an inhibition loop. The brain stop-and-go systems get caught cycling back and forth. Now, no, wait, now, no, wait. What starts as hesitation becomes paralysis. Philosophers have long noted this. The Greek thinker Zeno spoke of similar traps. In his paradoxes of motion, like the arrow frozen in flight, never moving because it must first reach infinite smaller points. But in human psychology, the trap is internal. The action freezes itself. There's also a deeper layer. Studies show that too much focus on performance destroys performance. It's called the choking effect. Athletes, speakers, artists, when they focus too much on how they're doing, they lock up. The solution isn't always to think harder. Sometimes it's to think less. In martial arts, there's a concept called mushin. No mind. Action without overthinking. Strike without freezing. You might think that's easy for others, not for me. But this isn't about skill. It's about allowing automatic systems to take over when conscious thought becomes too heavy, right? Now, as you listen, think about a decision you've been freezing on. A message you haven't sent. A project you haven't started. Why hasn't it happened yet? Chances are, it's not because you don't know what to do. It's because the longer you stand on the diving board, the heavier your own body becomes. And here's where the paradox sharpens. The only way to break the freeze is through imperfect action. Not the perfect step, but any step. Behavioral psychology proves this. In exposure therapy, small actions against fear, even clumsy, incomplete ones, break paralysis loops. The first movement matters more than the plan. Imagine again that diving board. You don't jump because everything feels ready. You jump because standing still has become heavier than falling now. As we continue forward into the next paradox, carry this thought. The moment of perfect readiness never comes, but the smallest action breaks the freeze. The action that freezes you only wins when you believe waiting will make it easier. In truth, waiting only makes it harder. There's a hidden cost buried inside every victory. It begins quietly, unnoticed. You set a goal, you work toward it. Step by step, struggle by struggle, you move closer, and then success. You reach the summit, you finish the project, you hit the target. But instead of energy, what fills you is emptiness. A quiet void where purpose used to be. This is the paradox of the success that destroys motivation. It's not just a feeling. It's a proven psychological effect called the satisfaction plateau. Studies show that achieving a goal often triggers a drop in dopamine levels, the very chemical that drove you to act in the first place. Your brain, wired for pursuit rather than possession, switches off the reward circuitry once the chase is over. That's why lottery winners often return to the same level of happiness they had before winning. That's why champions fall into depression after holding up a trophy. The climb generates meaning. The arrival erases it. It goes deeper than emotion. Neurological scans reveal that once a person believes they've done enough, brain regions tied to planning and effort reduce activity. Success literally shuts down the motivation engine. This is why some people, after reaching a goal, sabotage themselves, regaining lost weight, losing money they've earned, failing to maintain relationships they worked so hard to build. The mind seeks new struggle, even if it has to create it artificially. Philosophers have long described this. Nietzsche called it the abyss after the summit. Ancient Eastern texts describe how enlightenment seekers, after awakening, must learn to live without the drive that once carried them. But in modern life, it plays out as quiet self-destruction. Small bad habits creeping in after big wins. The paradox becomes sharper when we look at over-justification. When external rewards replace internal purpose, motivation collapses. Experiments show that kids who love drawing stop enjoying it once they're paid to do it. The reward eats the reason. Now think about your own life. The goals you've reached, the milestones you've crossed, did success bring lasting fire? Or did it leave you standing in a silent room, wondering what comes next? The success that destroys motivation isn't a flaw in the mind. It's part of its design. Evolution shaped humans for constant adaptation, not static achievement. What once was valuable becomes background noise. What once was urgent becomes ordinary. But awareness changes the shape of this trap. Instead of chasing static finish lines, focus can shift to dynamic goals. Mastery instead of victory, learning instead of ending. Scientists suggest framing tasks as open loops rather than closed ones. Instead of, I want to finish this, think, I want to keep growing this. That mindset maintains the dopamine cycle. There's always a next step, even after apparent success. Another technique involves ritual. Ancient cultures knew this intuitively. After a harvest there was not just celebration, but immediate replanting. The cycle resets. The mind stays active. So, as we move now to the next paradox, carry this understanding with you. Reaching the peak is not the end. It's a signal to look for the next mountain. Success will always dissolve motivation, unless you train your mind to love the climb. More than the arrival, the success that destroys motivation only holds power if you let yourself believe there's nothing left to do. But there's always more to do. Always a deeper layer to climb. Every day you make choices. What to eat, where to go, which word to say next. Choice feels like the core of who you are, the thing that separates you from machines or animals. But buried beneath every choice is a hidden loop, a trap that turns freedom into paralysis. This is the paradox of the choice that cancels itself. In psychology, it's called choice overload or decision fatigue. The more options you have, the harder each one becomes to make. It starts simple, choosing between 2 shirts, then 4, then 10. At first, more options seem like freedom, but as the mind weighs each possibility, attention fragments. Value becomes harder to measure. Studies show that when faced with too many options, people are less satisfied with any decision they make, and sometimes make no decision at all. Supermarkets with more flavors of jam sold fewer jars overall. Customers stared, brows furrowed, unable to choose. But it's not just about jam. Life itself can become like that shelf, rows of possibilities stretching endlessly, until moving forward feels impossible. The more you think about which path to take, the more each path feels flawed. Every choice echoes backward, making the others feel like mistakes. This leads to what neuroscientists call recursive regret, a feedback loop where considering one option triggers thoughts about the others left behind. Even before any action is taken, regret before the choice is even made. And here's where the paradox sharpens. The mind believes that more information will solve the problem. So you research, reflect, weigh pros and cons, but each new piece of information only deepens the spiral. The choice cancels itself. Action dissolves into thought. Thought dissolves into inaction. In ancient philosophy, this was known as Buridan's ass, a donkey placed exactly between 2 identical piles of hay, unable to choose one over the other and starving as a result. The trap isn't in the options. It's in believing there must be a perfect one. Real life doesn't offer perfection. It offers trade-offs. Psychologists suggest a method called satisficing, choosing the first option that meets a need, rather than hunting endlessly for the best. Satisficing cuts through the loop. It accepts imperfection in exchange for forward motion. Think now about your own life. The project's unfinished because you couldn't decide where to start. The relationship's left hanging because you couldn't decide what to say. The quiet weight of unmade choices pressing on your mind. You don't need the perfect option. You need momentum. And momentum begins the moment you accept that no choice is perfect, only chosen. The paradox teaches us not that choice is a trap to avoid, but that obsession with perfect choice is the real trap. The brain's power to evaluate becomes its own weakness when stretched too thin. Now, as we step forward into the next paradox, remember this: the more energy you spend trying to make the perfect choice, the less energy remains for living it. The choice that cancels itself only wins when you forget that choosing anything is better than choosing nothing at all. There's a strange and dangerous force hidden in the human mind, the feeling of certainty. You felt it before, in an argument, in a decision, in a quiet thought that seems too obvious to question. But what if that feeling of confidence isn't proof of knowing, but proof of not knowing enough? This is the paradox of the confidence that hides ignorance. Psychology gives it a name: the Dunning-Kruger effect. Studies show that the less someone knows about a subject, the more confident they tend to feel about it. People with low skill often rate themselves as above average. Why? Because knowing a little can blind you to how much there is left to know. The mind fills gaps not with questions, but with imagined certainty. It protects itself by believing it already understands in experiments. Participants asked to solve logic puzzles often overestimated their performance. The least skilled performers were the most confident. But there's a second layer. Those with true expertise often underestimate their abilities. Because the more you learn, the more you see the edges of your own knowledge. This isn't just theory. You see it everywhere: the loudest voices on social media, the quickest opinions in a crisis, the instant experts who appear overnight. Confidence doesn't always signal truth. It can mask a hollow center dot in neuroscience. This shows up in brain scans. Regions tied to error detection, like the anterior cingulate cortex, activate, lessen people unaware of their own mistakes. Ignorance literally switches off self-correction. And the mind, feeling no friction, rushes forward even faster. This is why some of the most dangerous mistakes in history have come from certainty. Leaders convinced of their own genius. Scientists ignoring data that doesn't fit. Ordinary people refusing to see another perspective. Now think about your own life. The times when you felt sure, but later discovered you were wrong. The quiet weight of realizing you'd spoken too quickly, acted too soon. The paradox becomes sharper when you realize it's not just others. It's you. It's all of us. Confidence grows fastest where knowledge is thinnest. And knowledge grows slowest where confidence is loudest. So how do you escape this trap? Awareness, humility, the willingness to say, I don't know. In fact, research shows that people who regularly reflect on what they might be missing improve not only in skill, but in emotional intelligence. In Zen philosophy, this is called beginner's mind, approaching each situation as if you know nothing, even when you've done it 1,000 times. It keeps the mind open, flexible, honest. But beginner's mind is difficult. It feels unnatural. Because the brain is wired to prefer certainty over doubt. Certainty feels safe. Doubt feels like danger. Yet in reality, it's doubt that protects you from blind spots. Now pause for a moment. Reflect. Where in your life right now might false confidence be hiding ignorance? In a habit? A relationship? A belief you've never fully questioned? Confidence that hides ignorance doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. It says, I already know. I don't need to check. I'm sure. That whisper is where the trap begins. As we move forward into the next paradox, carry this with you. The more sure you feel, the more gently you should check. Not to destroy your own confidence, but to keep it honest. Because in the quiet space between I know and I don't know, real understanding begins. There's a moment many people fear without realizing it. The moment when everything goes quiet. You're sitting alone, no music, no conversation, no notifications. At first, the silence feels peaceful. But then, something changes. The silence starts to feel louder than noise. Thoughts begin echoing inside your head. Memories rise. Worries unfold. This is the paradox of the silence that becomes louder. Psychologists have studied this phenomenon in sensory deprivation experiments. Place a person in a completely quiet, dark room, no sound, no light, no motion, and within minutes their Mind fills the gap. Some hear phantom sounds, footsteps, music, whispers. Others experience racing thoughts, self-criticism, flashes of old conversations. It's called sensory rebound. The less input from the outside world, the more the mind amplifies what's already inside. You would think silence is absence, but the human brain is never truly silent. Even in sleep, neurons fire. Even in meditation, thoughts flicker. Total quiet reveals not peace, but the noise we usually hide beneath distractions. In neuroscience, this is reflected in the default mode network, the system of the brain that activates when you're not focused on a task. The DMN lights up in silence, pulling thoughts from memory, imagination, worry, and regret. It loops in daily life. This plays out in small ways. The moment your phone dies, the hour before sleep, the early morning when no one is awake. Silence arrives, and with it, a storm of thought. This is why many people instinctively avoid silence. Why music plays in empty rooms. Why screens glow late into the night. It's not boredom we fear. It's facing the sound of our own mind without distraction. The paradox sharpens in moments of intentional silence. Meditation practitioners describe how, after a long practice, silence no longer echoes. The mind quiets. But reaching that point requires passing through the loud phase, sitting with the discomfort of thought spirals until they burn themselves out. Silence becomes loud before it becomes truly silent. Think about your own life. How often do you allow silence? And when it arrives, do you lean into it or escape? That reflexive escape is the trap. The silence that becomes louder only wins. When you avoid it long enough to never hear what it's really saying. In modern culture, constant noise has become normal. Notifications, media, background sound. The mind is trained to expect interruption. But silence, uncomfortable as it feels, reveals what's really there. Unprocessed emotion. Unanswered questions. Forgotten dreams. Philosophers across cultures have written about this. From Stoicism to Zen, the idea returns again and again. Silence as mirror. Silence as teacher. Silence as the only place where the mind can truly see itself. Now pause for a moment. Let everything around you grow quiet. Feel that weight. Notice the thoughts rising now, in this very moment. They are not mistakes. They are the hidden architecture of your mind, usually covered by the noise of the world, the silence that becomes. Louder teaches a simple lesson. Peace is not found by adding more. It is found by allowing less. By watching the echo, instead of running from it. As we move into the next paradox, carry this thought with you. Silence is not an empty room. It is a space where your real mind lives, waiting for you to listen. There's a moment almost everyone experiences. You work for something, a promotion, a relationship, a skill. You imagine how good it will feel once you get there. And then, once the reward arrives, something unexpected happens. The feeling fades. The thing you wanted so badly no longer feels as valuable. This is the paradox of the reward that devalues itself. In psychology. This is tied to a real effect called hedonic adaptation. The human mind is designed to return to a baseline level of happiness, no matter what changes occur. Lottery winners, according to studies, report spikes in happiness that quickly fade back to where they started. New cars lose their magic. New relationships settle into routine. The brain's reward system, particularly the dopamine pathways, is built for chasing, not holding. It goes deeper. Neuroscientists have found that dopamine peaks not when a reward is received, but just before, in the moment of anticipation. This means the brain values the pursuit more than the possession. It isn't the finish line that excites you. It's the race. This paradox sharpens when applied to everyday habits. Take social media, for example. You post a picture. You get likes, comments, attention. But over time, the same amount of feedback feels empty. You need more to feel the same level of satisfaction. This is called the reward prediction error. The brain expects a certain level of stimulation. When the reality doesn't match, value drops. Even deeper, external rewards can destroy internal motivation. This is known as the overjustification effect. In one experiment, children who loved drawing were paid for their artwork. Once the payment stopped, many no longer enjoyed drawing at all. The reward didn't just fade. It erased the original purpose. Now pause. Think about the things you chase in your own life. The rewards you believe will make everything feel complete. Are they permanent sources of fulfillment? Or will they quietly dissolve once achieved? The mind's design favors survival over satisfaction. Evolution taught us to keep moving, keep growing, keep searching. In ancient philosophy, this was called the hungry ghost cycle. Always consuming, never full. Modern consumer culture amplifies this, turning wants into needs, and needs into empty rituals. But understanding the paradox allows you to step outside of it. Not by abandoning goals, but by shifting focus from outcome to process. Studies show that people who find meaning in the act of doing, rather than in the prize at the end, experience longer lasting satisfaction. This is called intrinsic motivation. Instead of chasing the reward, you chase the rhythm. You build habits around the work itself, not the applause it brings. Now reflect on your own patterns. Where have rewards devalued themselves in your life? A job title that lost its shine. A possession that now gathers dust. An achievement that felt empty the moment it was secured. The reward that devalues itself is not a flaw in your character. It's a feature of the mind, but it can be reprogrammed through awareness. As we move into the next paradox, carry this with you. Fulfillment isn't in the thing you hold. It's in the hands that hold it. The mind that stays awake, moving, alive, long after the reward has disappeared. There's a certain kind of moment you've likely felt before. You try to control everything, your schedule, your emotions, the outcome of a conversation. You plan, you tighten your grip. And yet, the more control you try to exert, the more everything slips out of your hands. This is the paradox of the control that slips away when gripped too tight. In psychology, this ties to something called the paradox of control or ironic process theory. Studies show that when you try too hard to suppress a thought or control an outcome, the opposite often occurs. In one famous experiment, participants were told, "Do not think of a white bear." Almost immediately, the white bear dominated their thoughts. The harder they tried not to think about it, the more persistent it became. The same happens in everyday life. When someone tries to force relaxation, they often become more anxious. When you try to control another person's behavior too tightly, it often leads to rebellion or distance. When leaders micromanage, teams freeze up or lose creativity. The act of controlling creates the very disorder it fears. Neuroscientists have observed similar patterns in brain activity. Under stress, the prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for rational decision-making, can become overloaded. This leads to decision paralysis or emotional flooding. Control transforms into chaos, not because there wasn't enough control, but because there was too much. Ancient philosophies have long noted this. Taoism speaks of wu wei, or effortless action. True control, it says, is like steering a boat with a light touch, adjusting gently rather than gripping the wheel in panic. When rivers are allowed to flow, they carve valleys. When forced, they flood. In martial arts, the same principle applies. A master doesn't tense every muscle. They stay loose, ready to adapt. A rigid fighter breaks. A flexible one bends and survives. Now think about your own life. Where are you gripping to? Tightly? In a relationship? In a creative project? In trying to control how others see you? The places where frustration keeps rising are often the places where too much control has become its own kind of trap. The paradox sharpens when applied to internal emotions. Trying to force yourself to be happy can make you more aware of sadness. Forcing yourself to stay calm can increase stress. The more energy you pour into control, the more that control collapses in on itself. The solution isn't letting go entirely. It's balance. Psychologists call this cognitive flexibility, the ability to adjust strategies without clinging to one rigid path. People with higher cognitive flexibility show better emotional resilience, more creativity, and stronger relationships. They know when to hold and when to release. Think now about a recent moment where things felt out of control. Was it because you weren't trying hard enough? Or was it because you were trying too hard? The control that slips away when gripped. Too tight teaches a quiet lesson. Real power comes from knowing how much to hold and how much to trust. Not every thought must be managed. Not every outcome can be predicted. But when the mind stops trying to dominate everything, a new kind of calm emerges, not from force, but from flow. As we move now into the next paradox, carry this with you. Control is not a fist clenched as hard as possible. It's an open hand, steady enough to guide, but loose enough to let things move. True control is light, and it is in that lightness that real mastery lives. You remember moments from your life? The first time you saw the ocean, a childhood birthday, a conversation that changed everything. These memories feel solid, sharp images, clear emotions, trusted anchors to your past, but hidden inside every. Memory is a quiet flaw. Sometimes what you remember never happened exactly the way you think. This is the paradox of the memory that forgets being false. In psychology, it's known as the false memory effect. Countless studies have shown that human memory is not like a video recording. It's more like a story being rewritten every time you recall it. Each time you remember, you subtly alter the details, the colors, the sequence, even entire events. Over time, your mind forgets the edits. The false becomes true. The imagined becomes real. In one classic experiment, participants were shown a list of related words like bed, pillow, rest, dream. Later, many confidently remembered seeing the word sleep on the list, even though it had never been there. Their memory filled in the gap automatically, and they believed it completely. It's not just small mistakes. In more intense studies, entire events have been implanted through suggestion. People remember being lost in a mall as a child, a thing that never happened. They feel the emotions, see the images. Because memory is deeply tied to emotion, once a false detail feels emotionally real, the mind holds on to it as fact. Neuroscientists explain this through the process of memory reconsolidation. Each time you access a memory, your brain partially unlocks it, making it as vulnerable to change as wet cement. After you think about it, the memory resets with those new changes baked in. This is why eyewitness testimony is so unreliable. Two people can see the same event and later describe completely different things, both with total confidence. Think about your own life now. A favorite story you tell. A moment that defines how you see yourself. How much of it is perfectly accurate? How much has been quietly shaped by years of remembering, retelling, rethinking? The paradox deepens. Your memory does not just hold past experiences, it creates your present self. Your identity is built from stories about your own past. And if those stories are partly invented, who exactly are you? Philosophers have wrestled with this for centuries. Ancient Buddhist texts describe the self as an illusion maintained by memory and desire. Modern thinkers echo this, saying, the person you believe yourself to be is a remembered story, not a permanent truth, but the trap isn't hopeless. Knowing this paradox opens the door to using memory more consciously. Therapists use memory reconsolidation intentionally to help people heal from trauma. By revisiting painful memories while feeling safe, those memories can be softened, rewritten into something less destructive. You can do the same in your everyday life. Reflect gently on your memories, knowing they're flexible. Question your strongest certainties. Was it really exactly like that? Or is there room to see things differently now? Think again about your past. What are the memories you trust the most? Are you willing to let even those shift? The memory that forgets being false isn't a failure. It's how the mind adapts. Memory isn't meant to store the past like a museum. It's meant to serve the present, helping you survive and grow. As we move into the next paradox, carry this thought with you. The stories you tell yourself about your past are not fixed. They are alive. And just as they can quietly lead you, Into illusion, they can also quietly set you free. You wake up each day with plans. You intend to exercise, to work on your goals, to speak kindly, to avoid bad habits, and for a while you succeed. But as days turn into weeks, something happens. The conscious choice fades. The action continues. And one morning, you realize you've been moving through life automatically, repeating the same behaviors without remembering why. This is the paradox of the habit that erases intention. In neuroscience, this process is real and measurable. The brain's habit system, tied to the basal ganglia, allows learned behaviors to run on autopilot. At first, a new habit requires conscious effort. The prefrontal cortex lights up, making deliberate decisions. But as repetition builds, those same actions become automatic. The conscious mind steps aside. The body takes over. This system exists for survival. Imagine having to consciously think about tying your shoes every time, or driving, or brushing your teeth. Habits free mental energy for more complex tasks. But there's a hidden cost. Once an action becomes habit, the reason behind it fades from awareness. What began as a choice becomes a reflex. Psychologists call this habit slippage. You may start exercising to feel healthy, but months later, you're just moving through the motions, no longer connecting to the original goal. Or worse, bad habits become entrenched the same way. Checking your phone, smoking, eating without hunger. The body moves before the mind has a say. It sharpens into paradox when good intentions become lost beneath routine. Religious rituals, repeated without spiritual thought. Creative work done without passion. Relationships maintained through patterns, not presence. The habit continues, but the soul of it is gone. There's a deeper layer. Experiments show that people underestimate how much of their day is driven by habit. Up to 40% of actions are automatic. The paradox is invisible. You believe you are choosing, when in reality, you are repeating. Even more surprising, some habits can continue long after the conscious mind is impaired. In patients with memory loss, scientists observed that well-worn routines, like walking a familiar path, persisted. The body remembered when the mind could not. Now pause and reflect. What in your life today is a habit that once had meaning, but no longer does? Where are you moving automatically? Not because it helps, but simply because it's familiar. Philosophers and spiritual teachers have warned of this for centuries. From Zen monks sweeping floors mindfully to Stoic reminders. To question one's daily actions, the message is the same. Stay awake. Habits must serve intention, not replace it. So how do you escape the trap? It's not by destroying all habits. That would exhaust the mind. It's through conscious interruption. Psychologists suggest practices like habit journaling, tracking behaviors, and asking yourself regularly, why am I doing this? Small questions can break automaticity. Another tool is ritual redesign. Instead of eliminating a habit, reattach a new purpose to it. Turn walking into meditation. Turn cleaning into reflection. Bring awareness back to the automatic gut. Think now about one habit you'd like to examine. Imagine yourself performing it tomorrow. Will you be there, fully present, or will it simply happen? The habit that erases intention only holds power when you forget to look. And as we move into the next paradox, carry this awareness forward. The mind's greatest strength, automation, must always be balanced by its greatest challenge, conscious choice. There is a strange loop hidden in the human mind. You feel fear, so you avoid. You step back from danger, from discomfort, from risk. It feels logical. But quietly, in that act of avoidance, something else begins. The fear grows stronger. And over time, the very thing you ran from finds its way back to you. This is the paradox of the fear that attracts what you avoid. In psychology, this effect is called avoidance reinforcement. The more you avoid a feared situation, the more control that fear gains over your life. Avoid public speaking once, and it becomes harder the next time. Avoid difficult conversations, and they pile up. Avoid failure, and you create bigger failures later. It's not just about habits. Neuroscience shows that when fear pathways in the brain, particularly in the amygdala, are repeatedly triggered without resolution, they don't fade. They amplify. The mind strengthens the connection. This is dangerous. Stay away. But by never facing the fear, the mind has no chance to update that belief. Experiments in exposure therapy reveal this truth. Patients with phobias of spiders, heights, crowds find lasting relief not through avoidance, but through gradual, controlled exposure. Each small step toward the feared object teaches the brain, this is not as dangerous as I thought. The paradox sharpens when applied to everyday life. Think of someone who avoids conflict in a relationship. By not addressing small issues, larger problems quietly grow beneath the surface. Avoidance breeds the very outcome it was meant to prevent. It is also a cultural layer. Entire societies teach avoidance as a form of politeness or control. Don't rock the boat. Don't make a scene. But unspoken problems do not disappear. They expand in silence. Now pause and think about your own life. What are you avoiding right now? A decision, a person, a truth about yourself? Can you feel the weight of that avoidance growing quietly in the background? Philosophers have written about this for centuries. From Stoic teachings on courage to Zen koans about embracing the shadow, the message is the same. What you fear becomes your prison, not because of what it is, but because of how tightly you run from it. Even in physics, there's a strange echo of this idea. In systems theory, avoiding one point of stress often redistributes that stress elsewhere, sometimes in more destructive ways. The pressure doesn't vanish. It moves. So how do you break the loop? The first step is awareness. Recognizing the avoidance as it happens. Catching yourself in the moment of stepping back, pausing long enough to ask, what am I really afraid of? The second step is controlled approach. Not diving headfirst into fear, but moving toward it in small, deliberate ways. One conversation. One action. 1 minute in the uncomfortable space. Studies show that even brief exposures, measured in seconds, begin rewiring the brain's fear response. Courage doesn't require erasing fear. It requires standing still long enough for fear to shrink. Think. Again, now, where is fear leading your life in quiet ways? Not the big fears, but the small, invisible ones. The email you haven't sent. The idea you haven't shared. The feeling you haven't admitted. The fear that attracts what you avoid is not a flaw in your mind. It's an ancient survival system. But survival is not the same as living fully. As we step now into the next paradox, carry this lesson with you. Freedom does not come from escaping fear. It comes from walking through it, one step at a time, eyes open, heart steady, until the thing you feared most becomes just another path beneath your feet. There's a quiet structure behind every decision you make. Rules. Rules about right and wrong, safe and unsafe, what's allowed and what's forbidden. Some are written in laws. Others are private codes you carry in your own mind. But hidden, inside every system of rules is a paradox. The more perfectly a rule is followed, the more likely it is to break itself. This is the paradox of the rule that breaks itself. In logic, it appears as the self-referential paradox. Consider the sentence, this statement is false. If the statement is true, it must be false. If it's false, it must be true. But this isn't just wordplay. In real life, rules often collapse when pushed to their limits. Think about fairness. A rule designed to treat everyone equally sounds perfect. Yet applying it blindly, without flexibility, can lead to deep injustice. Imagine a classroom rule. No one is allowed extra time on a test. But what about the student with a disability? Treating everyone exactly the same can create the opposite of fairness. In psychology, this shows up as rule rigidity. Studies show that when people cling too tightly to a rule, they often make worse decisions than if they had trusted their judgment. For example, drivers strictly obeying speed limits in dangerous weather, instead of adjusting their speed based on conditions, may cause accidents. Neuroscience backs this up. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for rule-based thinking, must constantly balance logic with real-world feedback. When that balance is lost, the brain slips into what's called perseveration, repeating the same action even when it's no longer useful or safe. There's a deeper cultural layer. 2. Societies create laws and systems meant to bring order. But history is filled with examples where strict enforcement of a rule led to collapse. Zero-tolerance policies that punished the innocent. Financial regulations that, by closing one loophole, opened others even larger. Think now about your own life. The personal rules you follow. I must always be polite. I must never show weakness. I have to finish what I start. Have there been times when those very rules created harm rather than good? Philosophers and spiritual teachers have long pointed to this. The Tao Te Ching speaks of the dangers of over-control. The more rules and regulations, the more thieves and robbers. In Zen practice, there are forms but no fixed doctrines. The path must adapt moment by moment. So how do you live with rules without being trapped by them? It begins with awareness. Realizing that every rule has a boundary where it stops working. That flexibility is not weakness, it is wisdom. Psychologists suggest a model called metacognition, thinking about thinking. Instead of obeying a rule automatically, pause and ask, is this rule serving me right now, or am I serving the rule? That question alone can break the loop. Another approach is creating principles instead of rigid rules. For example, rather than saying, I must always tell the truth, you hold the principle, I value honesty, but I also value kindness. It creates space for both structure and humanity. Now reflect again. Where in your life are you following a rule too tightly? Is there a place where loosening your grip might actually bring more clarity, more peace? The rule that breaks itself is not an argument against structure. It's a reminder that structure must serve life, not the other way around. As we move into the next paradox. Hold this thought. The strongest systems are those that know when to bend. A mind that adapts survives storms. A rule that can change keeps its true power long after rigid laws have crumbled to dust. There's a quiet illusion most people carry without realizing it. The belief that simply watching does not change what is being watched. That observation is passive, neutral, safe. But hidden inside every act of watching, of analyzing, of measuring, is a force shaping the very thing you hope to understand. This is the paradox of the observer that creates the chaos. In physics, it's reflected in the observer effect. In quantum mechanics, particles behave differently when measured. Light moves as a wave until it is observed, collapsing into a particle. The act of looking changes reality. But in human psychology, this paradox is even sharper. In social science, it's called the Hawthorne effect. When people know they're being watched, their behavior changes. Factory workers improve productivity under observation, not because of new rules or rewards, but simply because they feel seen. Students focus better during tests if they believe the teacher is watching. The self becomes performative under the gaze, but it goes deeper. Observing yourself can create the same effect. Psychologists call this self-monitoring. Athletes who focus too much on their own movements freeze up. Writers get blocked, staring too hard at their own words. Even in meditation, beginners struggle with the watcher's paradox, trying so hard to observe their thoughts that they become trapped in overthinking. Neuroscience shows that self-observation activates regions of the brain tied to meta-awareness, but it also increases cognitive load. The mind becomes divided, part acting, part watching, neither flowing freely. Now think about your own life. Have you ever felt yourself collapse under your own gaze? Standing in front of a mirror, rehearsing what to say, replaying mistakes in your head. The more you watched, the more chaotic it became. The paradox sharpened when applied to social systems. Surveillance meant to maintain order can increase tension, suspicion, even rebellion. Monitoring employees too closely can reduce trust, productivity, and creativity. The watcher creates the very disorder they were meant to prevent. Philosophers have explored this for centuries. From the panopticon theory in sociology, where prisoners behave as if always watched, to Zen teachings warning against self-conscious thought. The lesson is clear. Observation is not neutral. It's an active force, but the trap isn't absolute. Awareness does have value. Self-reflection builds insight. Monitoring behavior can improve discipline. The key is balance, knowing when to observe and when to let go. In psychology, this balance is called flow state. Flow occurs when the self disappears. The dancer is only the dance. The writer is only the words. The speaker is only the speech. In these moments, there is no observer, only action. To access flow, scientists recommend reducing self-monitoring during tasks. For example, turning off the camera while working. Writing first, editing later. Speaking without rehearsing every line. Trusting instinct over constant analysis. Now pause and reflect. Where in your life are you watching yourself too closely? Where has observation become obsession? In creativity, in relationships, and personal growth, the mind can only carry so many layers at once, and sometimes the layer of the watcher must be set down. The observer that creates the chaos teaches. There is power in looking, but also in looking away. In trusting the system to run without constant control. As we move now into the next paradox, carry this thought with you. Not every moment must be observed. Some things grow best when left unseen, left to move freely, beyond the reach of the watching mind. Imagine standing at a fork in the road. One path leads through fire, the other through ice. Neither is the path you want. But you must choose. And when you do, something strange happens. Your mind feels relief. It believes you exercised free will, even though both options were shaped by forces outside your control. This is the paradox of the choice between two evils that feels free. In psychology, this relates to a phenomenon called bounded rationality. Human decisions are rarely made in pure freedom. They're made within limited information, limited resources, and options that someone else or some system has already designed. From political elections to product menus, we often pick between 2 or 3 options, forgetting to ask, who placed these options here? Behavioral economists study this through something called the default effect. When people are given a preset choice, such as whether to donate their organs after death, most will go with the default, whether it's yes or no, depending on their country's system. The illusion of choice masks deeper structures of control. Even deeper, neuroscience shows that when people make decisions between limited options, brain activity related to reward spikes, as if choosing between 2 evils still provides a sense of autonomy. The prefrontal cortex lights up, engaging as if this small act is meaningful, even though the real freedom was already lost before the question was ever asked. Think about this in your own life. How often are you choosing between 2 things you wouldn't have picked if given true freedom? A job you dislike or unemployment? A relationship that drains you or solitude? Social media platforms that all feel toxic, yet leaving them feels unthinkable. This paradox sharpens in social systems. Governments, corporations, and institutions often present limited choices to maintain the illusion of control while narrowing real possibilities. Bread or rice, but no mention of planting your own food. 2 brands, both owned by the same company. Philosophers describe this as false dichotomy, a rhetorical trap where reality is framed in black and white terms too. Limit thought. Zen teachers speak of this when they remind students there are more than 2 doors. Yet most people walk through life choosing between door A and door B, never questioning who built the hallway. So what's the escape from this loop? Awareness, meta decision making. Instead of asking, which of these do I prefer? Ask, do I want to play this game at all? Psychologists suggest a strategy called expanding the frame. When faced with a choice, pause to consider if there's a third path, one outside the presented structure. Studies show that people trained to think this way report higher creativity, stronger life satisfaction, and more authentic choices. Now, reflect. Where in your life are you choosing between 2 options that feel wrong, yet feel inevitable? What if the real choice wasn't between fire and ice, but whether to walk off the path altogether. The choice between two evils that feels free isn't a failure of willpower. It's a structural illusion. But illusions can be broken by looking outside them. As we move now into the next paradox. Carry this with you. Freedom isn't just about making a choice. It's about knowing when the real power is refusing to choose at all. Not fire, not ice, but open sky, the path beyond the fork, waiting quietly for those brave enough to see it. There's a quiet echo in the human mind, a feeling that returns again and again without clear reason. You've felt it. A sudden wave of sadness on a calm day, an edge of anger when nothing provokes you, anxiety that rises in an empty room. This is the paradox of the emotion that repeats without a cause. In psychology, this is linked to emotional residue. Studies show that emotions don't always fade when the situation ends. They linger, cycling through the body and brain long after. The event that sparked them has disappeared, like perfume left behind in an empty room or the vibration of a bell long after it's been struck. Neuroscience explains this through patterns in the amygdala and hippocampus, two regions responsible for processing emotion and memory. When the mind experiences strong feelings, it creates loops between memory and sensation. The result is emotional echoes. A mood arises not because of what's happening now, but because of the shape left behind by what happened hours, days, or even years ago. It goes deeper. Sometimes there's no original event. Emotions can self-perpetuate. In mood disorders like depression or chronic anxiety, the brain's chemical balance shifts. Feelings arise on their own, unlinked to external triggers. Yet the mind still searches for reasons, attaching stories to justify the sensation. You feel sad, so your thoughts dig through memory until they find a story that fits, even if that story wasn't bothering you moments before. This is called affective forecasting error. The mind expects emotions to follow logic and cause, but in reality, they often do not. Feelings arrive uninvited and stay as long as they like. Think now about your own life. How often have you woken up in a mood that made no sense? How often have you said, "I don't know why I feel this way"? That's not failure. It's the structure of mind revealing itself. The paradox sharpens when we look at behavior. Emotional residue can shape choices without your awareness. Studies show that people in sad moods are more likely to make conservative financial decisions. Angry moods lead to risk-taking. But these decisions may have nothing to do with present circumstances, only with the echo of a feeling. Philosophers have written about this for centuries. In Buddhist thought, clinging to emotion is seen as the root of suffering. The goal is not to destroy feeling, but to recognize its fleeting, cyclical nature. Emotions are like weather. Real, but not permanent. So how do you break the loop? Awareness again becomes the key. Mindfulness practices, especially those focused on observing emotion without judgment, teach the brain to notice feelings without being trapped by them. Neuroscientific studies show that simply labeling an emotion, saying, "This is sadness," reduces its intensity by shifting activity from the emotional centers to the rational mind. Another tool is what psychologists call mood tracking. Writing down feelings throughout the day helps reveal patterns. You may discover that some emotions rise and fall predictably, unrelated to specific events. Once you see the pattern, its power weakens. Now reflect again. What emotion keeps repeating in your life without a clear cause? Is it sadness? Irritation? Restlessness? Instead of asking why, ask how often. Watch the cycle. Feel the rhythm. The emotion that repeats without a cause is not your enemy. It's part of the echoing architecture of mind. But like an echo, it loses strength when you stop shouting back at it. As we move into the next paradox, carry this thought. Not every feeling needs a reason. Some are just waves passing through. Your task is not always to fight them, but to stand steady as they rise and fall. From the moment you were born, labels begin to shape you. Your name, your role in a family. As you grow, more labels arrive. Student, employee, introvert, extrovert, smart, lazy, strong, weak. Labels seem like shortcuts to understanding. But hidden inside them is a trap. The more tightly a label is applied, the harder it becomes to live beyond it. This is the paradox of the identity that can't escape its label dot in psychology. This is linked to labeling theory. Studies show that once people are labeled, especially by authority figures or social groups, their behavior begins to match the label. A child called troublemaker at school is more likely to act out. A patient diagnosed with a mental health condition may unconsciously take on traits of the diagnosis. Even if those traits weren't originally present, neuroscientists describe it as a form of self-fulfilling prophecy. When a label is repeated often enough, the brain's neural pathways adapt around it. Identity and behavior shift to align with the expectation. It's not deliberate. It happens automatically, beneath conscious thought. This effect isn't always negative. Positive labels can create growth too. Telling someone they are kind, strong, or resilient can reinforce those qualities. But the danger lies in rigidity. Labels harden. They become invisible boundaries around what a person believes they can or cannot do. Think now about your own life. What labels have you carried for years, spoken by others, or whispered by yourself? Are they still true? Were they ever? I'm shy. I am bad with numbers. I'm not artistic. These phrases may have started as observations. Over time, they became cages. The paradox sharpens when applied to culture. Entire groups of people are often trapped by collective labels. Immigrant, minority, criminal, genius. Once applied, these labels shape not just how others see them, but how they see themselves. Philosophers have warned of this for centuries. From Zen teachings that reject fixed self-concepts to existentialist thought, emphasizing constant becoming. The message is clear. Identity must be fluid, not fixed. You are not a label. You are a process, Doc, but how do you break free? Awareness is the first step. Psychologists recommend a practice called label questioning. Actively writing down the labels you believe of yourself. Then asking for each one, is this always true? Who gave me this label? What would happen if I acted as if it weren't true? Another tool is role expansion. Deliberately stepping into roles that contradict your labels. If you've always been called quiet, try public speaking. If you've always believed you're bad at art, pick up a brush. The action rewires the mind. Studies show that self-concept shifts dramatically after even small experiments in new roles. Now pause and reflect. Again, what is one label you carry that might not be real? What identity are you holding on to because it feels safe, even if it no longer fits? The identity that can't escape its label teaches a quiet but powerful lesson. Who you are today does not have to be who you were yesterday. Labels describe. They do not define. As we move into the next paradox, carry this thought. The self is not a single shape. It is water shifting to fill each moment. The labels may stick like tattoos, but beneath them you remain free, ready to change, ready to grow. There's something strange about time. You live it second by second. Yet most of the moments that pass through your life vanish before you even realize they existed. One breath, one blink, one step. This is the paradox of the moment that's gone before you notice it. In philosophy, it's tied to the idea of the specious present, the sliver of time the human mind can consciously hold. Neuroscientists estimate that the brain's present moment lasts around 2 to 3 seconds. That's all. Anything before it becomes memory. Anything after it becomes future. Think about it. As you listen right now, everything you hear is already in the past. Your mind registers sound, then processes it. By the time you consciously think, I am here, the moment you're referring to has already slipped away. Psychologists observe this in experiments on attention. People asked to report the exact time a light flashes, often misjudged by fractions of a second. It's not a flaw. It's how consciousness works. Your mind creates the illusion of a continuous flow by stitching together these brief flashes of now. But the paradox becomes sharper in everyday life. Most of what happens in your day isn't recorded in memory. Walking down a hallway, washing your hands, looking out a window. Millions of micro moments dissolve without trace. Yet those moments are not empty. Studies show that much of human happiness is tied to small, unnoticed experiences, the feeling of sunlight, the rhythm of breath, the sound of quiet. These micro pleasures often pass beneath conscious awareness. You can only feel them if you slow down enough to notice. The trap is that modern life pulls attention away from the now. Technology fragments focus. Multitasking divides the mind further. Psychologists call this time blindness, the inability to sense how much time is truly passing because attention is elsewhere. Even more, in states of stress or depression, the mind contracts time. Minutes feel like hours, or hours vanish without memory. The present becomes even thinner, harder to hold. Philosophers from Buddhism to Stoicism warn of this. They teach presence as a discipline, not to control the future, not to relive the past, but simply to exist fully in this breath, this step, this moment. So, how do you live inside the moment before it's gone? Mindfulness training offers one path. Exercises that focus on noticing physical sensations, the texture of your hands, the sound of wind, help stretch the specious present. Meditation does not slow time physically, but it allows the mind to observe more of what's already happening. There's also the practice of deliberate pausing. Throughout the day, stop and ask, where am I right now? What do I feel? What do I hear? Neuroscientists have found that even these short check-ins rewire attention circuits. Pulling consciousness back to now, reflect. How much of today have you really lived? How many moments have you noticed before they disappeared? The moment that's gone before you notice it is not a flaw in reality. It's part of its beauty. Life moves in waves too small to hold all at once. But by becoming aware of even a few more of those waves, you expand your experience of being a live dot as we move into the next paradox. Carry this thought. The present is always passing, always arriving. It doesn't wait, but it can be met in quiet, in breath, in attention, one heartbeat at a time. There is a moment inside every mind when a thought appears, uninvited and unquestioned. It might be a belief about yourself, about the world, about what will happen next. And without evidence, without testing, the mind accepts it as true. This is the paradox of the thought that proves nothing yet feels true. In psychology. This connects directly to the concept of cognitive biases, mental shortcuts your brain uses to make sense of overwhelming information. One of the most powerful is belief perseverance. Even when presented with clear evidence that a belief is false, people often hold on to it simply because it feels emotionally right. Neuroscientists have observed this in studies. Using functional MRI scans, when people are shown facts that contradict their deeply held beliefs, the areas of the brain tied to logical reasoning often quiet down. Instead, the emotional centers light up. The brain protects its own story before it protects truth. This isn't just about politics or religion. It happens in everyday life. You might think, I always mess things up, or they don't really like me. No proof, no direct cause. But the thought slides in, fitting into an emotional groove worn by past experiences. These grooves, built from childhood memories, repeated patterns, cultural messages, create what psychologists call core beliefs. And once a core belief settles in, almost any new thought that matches its tone feels automatically true, even if it logically doesn't hold. This is also reflected in a phenomenon called confirmation bias. The mind actually looks for evidence that supports what it already believes, ignoring or forgetting anything that contradicts it. Think about it now. A belief you carry without proof. Perhaps I'm not good enough. Or people can't be trusted. How often does that thought appear? Not as a question, but as a quiet background truth. The paradox sharpens when applied to memory. Studies show that even false memories, once believed, feel as real as true ones. Your mind doesn't distinguish between fact and based on evidence alone. Emotion is the filter. Philosophers across history have written about this trap. From Descartes' search for a single undeniable truth to Buddhist teachings about illusion, the struggle is the same. How do you know what's really real? The answer begins with awareness. Psychologists recommend cognitive restructuring, a method where you actively write down beliefs, then list reasons for and against them. Not to destroy every thought, but to weaken the automatic hold. Another tool is mindful questioning. When a strong belief arises, pause and ask, what is the evidence for this thought? What would I say to a friend who believed the same thing? This creates a gap between feeling and fact. Allowing logic to step back into the room. Now, reflect again. What quiet background thought shapes your life right now? Is it one of certainty? Or one that might dissolve if truly examined? The thought that proves nothing yet feels true isn't a flaw. It's part of the mind's attempt to navigate a complex world. Certainty creates safety, but left unchecked, it becomes its own kind of prison. As we step into the next paradox, carry this idea. Not every thought deserves belief. Some thoughts are echoes, some are habits, some are shadows cast by old experiences. But you are not required to trust them all. The real power lies in watching them pass, questioning them gently, and choosing which ones deserve to stay. Imagine trying to put out a fire with water, only to realize too late that it was an oil fire. And the more you pour, the bigger the flames become. That's the shape of this next paradox, the solution that worsens the problem. In psychology, it's called a maladaptive coping mechanism. It happens when the mind, trying to protect itself, creates a pattern that makes things worse in the long run. One of the clearest examples is avoidance. You feel anxious about a situation, so you avoid it. The anxiety shrinks temporarily. But the more you avoid, the scarier that situation becomes, until even small steps toward it feel impossible. Neuroscience explains this with the reinforcement loop. Avoidance behavior activates short-term reward centers in the brain, a hit of relief, but each time the mind gets that reward, the avoidance pattern strengthens. Over time, it turns into chronic anxiety, phobia, or addiction. The same paradox applies to anger. You feel disrespected, so you lash out to regain control. It feels like a solution. But often aggression escalates the very conflict you wanted. To end. In social systems, this pattern shows up as the perverse incentive. Laws meant to protect can create loopholes that make things worse. For example, strict anti-loitering rules may push homelessness into more dangerous areas, increasing crime rather than reducing it. Or health systems designed to prevent fraud become so strict that they deny care to people who need it most. The deeper layer is emotional self-sabotage. People overeat while trying to diet. People overspend while trying to save. The solution becomes the fuel for the fire. Philosophers have written about this for centuries. The Taoist idea of Wu Wei, effortless action, warns against forcing solutions. Sometimes, effort itself multiplies the problem. So how do you step out of this trap? It starts with meta-awareness. Instead of asking only, what will fix this? Right now, ask, what effect will this have tomorrow? A week from now? This small shift in time perspective helps the brain step out of the immediate reward loop. Another tool is stress testing your solutions. Psychologists suggest visualizing not just success, but failure. If this plan goes wrong, how will it make things worse? This creates what's called adaptive pessimism, using doubt as a guide, rather than as a block. Now reflect. Where in your life are you solving problems in ways that secretly feed them? Is it in how you handle stress, money, relationships? The solution that worsens the problem isn't about making bad choices. It's about unconscious repetition. The mind clings to what feels safe in the short term, ignoring the long-term. As we move into the next paradox, carry this thought. Not every action meant to heal actually heals. Sometimes the real solution begins by stepping back, pausing, letting the fire show you what kind of flame it really is before you reach for the water. You often think of life as a line, the past behind you, the future ahead, cause, then effect, action, then consequence. But hidden within that simple flow is a deeper loop. Sometimes it isn't the past shaping the future. It's the future reshaping the past. This is the paradox of the future that writes the past. In neuroscience, it's reflected in a process called memory reconsolidation. Each time you remember something, that memory isn't simply replayed, it's rewritten. But here's where it sharpens. Your mind rewrites past memories based on your present understanding of the future. If you now believe the world is dangerous, past events feel more threatening when remembered. If you now believe you are strong, past struggles feel more like lessons than wounds. Psychologists observe this most clearly in therapy. A person reflecting on childhood trauma may feel entirely different emotions about those events after growing in self-awareness. The facts don't change, but their emotional and personal meaning does. It's called cognitive reframing. Everyday life, the same loop appears. Think about a relationship that ended painfully. At first, the past feels like pure loss. But years later, having moved forward, you may look back and say, that needed to happen. It made me who I am. The future version of you rewrites the past story. Even in physics, there are echoes of this idea. In quantum mechanics, certain interpretations suggest that future states can influence the probability of past events, called retrocausality. While not fully proven, the thought aligns with what the mind does every day, rearranging history according to present and future knowledge. The paradox becomes sharper in larger systems. Cultures rewrite history constantly. Victories are remembered while defeats are forgotten. Heroes are created from complex, flawed people. Textbooks change with political tides. The future's needs shape what parts of the past are taught and remembered. Now pause and reflect. What part of your own past has changed in meaning as you've grown? A failure that became a turning point? A loss that led to something greater? Philosophers have explored this loop as well. In Nietzsche's idea of eternal recurrence, every moment echoes forward and backward. In Buddhist thought, karma is not just about cause and effect, but how perception changes over time, the ripple of now flowing in all directions. But how can you use this paradox rather than be trapped by it? It begins with intentional reflection. Instead of letting the past rewrite itself randomly, you can engage with it actively. Psychologists suggest journaling exercises, writing old memories as they felt then rewriting them as they feel now, allowing both versions to exist side by side. Another practice is future-focused visualization. Imagine the version of yourself 5 years from now, wiser, calmer. What story would that future self tell about today's struggles? Seeing from that perspective allows your current moment to become part of a larger, evolving narrative. Now reflect once more. Which memories in your life still feel heavy because you haven't yet seen what future they might belong to? The future that writes the past doesn't mean erasing what happened. It means realizing that history is a living script, not a fixed record. As we move into the next paradox, carry this thought. Time is not a straight line. Your life is a loop of stories folding into each other, past into present, present into future, and future quietly folding back into the past. And in the middle of that loop stands you, both author and reader, writing and rewriting the book of yourself as you live it. There's a belief most people hold quietly beneath their everyday thoughts. That freedom is the ultimate goal. To be free from rules, from limits, from anyone telling you what to do. Yet hidden within that very pursuit is a trap, the paradox of the prison you build from freedom. In psychology, this connects to what's known as the paradox of choice. Studies show that when people are presented with too many options, rather than feeling liberated, they experience anxiety, paralysis, and regret. Supermarkets with 50 brands of cereal don't make customers happier. They make them more stressed. In fact, many walk away without buying anything at all. Neuroscientists explain this. Through the brain's decision-making circuits, the prefrontal cortex, responsible for weighing options, can only hold a limited number of variables in working memory. When flooded with too many choices, it becomes overloaded. Cognitive fatigue sets in. Freedom becomes exhausting. But it's not just about shopping. In life, the same loop appears. When every path is open, when there are no clear boundaries or commitments, people often feel lost. The absence of limits creates not peace, but weight. Possibility turns into pressure. Philosophers from Kierkegaard to Sartre have written about this. Sartre described absolute freedom as a kind of vertigo, the dizziness of freedom. With no external structure to hold on to, the self spins endlessly, unsure where to stand. The paradox sharpens in modern life. Social media promises infinite freedom of expression, but often creates cycles of comparison, anxiety, and self-doubt. Open relationships offer the freedom to love anyone, but sometimes lead to emotional instability. Quitting a job to work for yourself sounds liberating until you realize there are no off hours, no rules, and no guaranteed path forward. Now, reflect where in your own life has freedom become its own kind of prison? Are there places where having too many options has quietly drained your energy instead of expanding it? Psychologists suggest a counterintuitive solution, self-imposed. Limits, creating rules and structures not as walls, but as scaffolding. In one experiment, people given fewer menu choices reported higher satisfaction with their meal than those overwhelmed with endless options. Another technique is deliberate commitment. Choosing to close certain doors, not because you are trapped, but because you value depth over width. This is what philosophers call the freedom of limitation, choosing fewer paths, so you can walk one of them more fully. Think again now. Where can you set a boundary that might actually make you feel freer? The prison you build from freedom teaches that limitless choice is not the same as meaningful choice. Meaning arises not from having all options, but from choosing with care and letting the rest fall away as we step into the next paradox. Carry this thought. True freedom is not found in endless open doors. It's found in walking through one door fully and closing it behind you, not as a loss, but as an act of quiet, intentional strength. There is a moment you've likely experienced before. The conversation ends. The music fades, the room goes still, and yet inside your mind, words keep repeating. A phrase someone said, a line from a song, a thought you wish you'd spoken. Even though silence surrounds you, something continues moving. This is the paradox of the voice that echoes after silence. In neuroscience. This is tied to what's called auditory imagery and verbal rumination. The brain's language centers, particularly Broca's area, Wernicke's area, don't shut off when external sound stops. They keep processing and replaying words internally, often without your conscious control. It's part of how memory and learning work, but it also creates loops, unfinished conversations that repeat long after they're over. Psychologists observe this in the form of rehearsal loops. After an argument or presentation, many people mentally replay what they said, analyzing each word. This can help with learning, improving future communication, but it can also trap the mind in cycles of regret or self-criticism. You said too much. You said too little. You said the wrong thing. The paradox becomes sharper in quiet environments. Studies show that in sensory deprivation chambers, places designed to create total silence, participants often report hearing phantom voices, music, or internal monologues growing louder. The quieter the outside world becomes, the louder the inside voice can feel. This isn't just about anxiety. Even positive words and affirmations can echo. Spiritual practices like mantra meditation deliberately use repetition to embed certain phrases deep into consciousness. The mind, once imprinted with a sound, carries it forward, shaping thoughts, mood, even body posture. Philosophers and poets have written about this for centuries. From Zen koans that repeat endlessly in the mind, to stoic reminders whispered internally like prayers. The voice that echoes after silence can become either a torment or a guide. Now pause and reflect. What voice is echoing in your mind most often these days? Is it your own voice? Someone else's? And is it speaking words that build you up or tear you down? Psychologists suggest practices to work with these internal echoes rather than against them. One is structured journaling, writing down recurring thoughts or phrases until they lose their grip. Another is conscious replacement, deliberately planting new phrases or affirmations in place of old, harmful ones. Neuroscientific studies show that even a few weeks of such practice can change brain connectivity, reducing rumination-related activity and increasing focus and calm. The voice that echoes after silence teaches that not all sound comes from outside. The mind is its own speaker, its own listener. And what it repeats, even when you're not paying attention, shapes who you are becoming. As we move into the final paradox, carry this thought: silence is not the end of the conversation. It's where the deepest conversation begins. Not between you and the world, but between you and yourself. What words will you choose to let echo in that space? There's a moment hidden inside every mind. The instant after you notice something, and then forget it just as quickly. You catch a thought, an insight, a glimpse of understanding, and a breath later, it's gone, as if it was never there. This is the paradox of the observer that forgets what it saw. In psychology, this connects to something called fleeting awareness. Studies show that conscious attention operates in extremely short windows. A phenomenon known as attentional blink reveals that when two visual signals appear in quick succession, the second is often missed entirely. The brain processes the first, and in doing so becomes blind to what follows. You see, then forget. Observe, then erase. It happens in everyday life constantly. You walk into a room with a purpose, only to forget why. You have a sudden, brilliant idea while falling asleep, but in the morning, there's nothing left. Scientists explain this through working memory limits. The human mind can only hold a handful of items at once. Anything outside that fragile focus fades unless deliberately encoded into long-term memory. But the paradox deepens when applied to self-awareness. During moments of meditation, flow, or sudden insight, people often experience clear understanding, a sense of "I see it now." Yet as soon as attention drifts, that clarity dissolves. It's like waking from a dream you were fully inside, only to find the details slipping through your fingers. Philosophers describe this as the veil of Maya in Hindu thought, or the cloud of unknowing in Christian mysticism. Truth flashes before the mind, but the mind cannot hold on to it. The observer glimpses reality and then forgets. There's a reason for this. Neuroscientists suggest that total awareness of all things all the time would overwhelm the brain. Forgetting is not a failure. It's a protective function, allowing focus, survival, and movement. Yet it leaves you with a quiet ache, the feeling that something important has been lost. So how do you live with this paradox? Psychologists and philosophers suggest cultivating memory anchors, writing things down as soon as they arise, creating rituals to mark insights, speaking them aloud. Meditation practices often include a final moment of reflection, reviewing what was seen, so it does not vanish entirely. Another technique is slowing down. The faster you move, the more likely awareness is to flash and fade. Pausing, breathing, observing gently allows more of the mind's quiet observations to settle. Now reflect. How many insights have you lost simply because you didn't capture them? How many moments of clarity dissolved in the rush of the next task, the next thought? The observer that forgets what it saw teaches this. Wisdom is not just in seeing, but in remembering. In catching those flashes of light and finding a way to hold them gently without squeezing too hard. As we move toward conclusion, carry this thought. Your mind is both mirror and river. It reflects and it flows. What you see today may vanish tomorrow. But if you stay watching, if you keep your hand open, the next glimpse will come again. And perhaps this time it will stay just a little longer. Now, as the last paradox settles and silence begins to fill the space again, take a breath. Let yourself drift back through the entire path we've walked tonight, the expectation that shapes the outcome, the shortcut that takes longer. The observer that forgets what it saw. Each paradox was not a riddle meant to confuse you. It was a mirror, a quiet reflection of how your own mind operates every hour, every day, dot. And as you listened, you may have felt a quiet weight, the sense that everything you once thought was simple is more complex than it seemed. That your choices, your memories, your emotions, even your sense of self, all of them carry hidden loops, traps inside traps. But here's where we must be careful. The point of seeing these paradoxes is not to feel helpless. It's not to believe that the mind is only a maze. It's to recognize something much quieter and much more profound. That awareness itself, simply noticing, begins to break the loop. You cannot solve the paradox of the mind by force. You cannot control thought into perfection. But by watching it gently, without judgment, a new layer of self begins to appear. The part of you that notices the thought before it becomes belief. The part of you that feels the emotion without becoming the emotion. The part of you that remembers and knows it may forget, got in neuroscience. This is sometimes called metacognition, awareness of awareness. But in ancient teachings, it goes by many names. The witness, the silent mind, the clear light behind thought. Jot, you have touched that space tonight, even if only for a moment. And touching it once is enough to return to it again. Now imagine your life beyond this video, beyond this quiet moment. Tomorrow, next week, you will still face the same paradoxes. The habit that erases intention. The memory that forgets being false. The future that writes the past. But next time you may catch them a little sooner. Feel the loop as it begins. Instead of only after it's closed, you may pause before a choice and ask, is this freedom or the illusion of freedom? Is this control or the control that slips away when gripped too tight? Is this me or just the label I've been wearing for too long? That pause is the key. The doorway back to yourself, dot, because in the end, the mind's greatest trick is not that it traps you. It's that it hides the fact that it ever built a trap at all, dot. But tonight, for these 2 quiet hours, you have seen the walls. You have walked the halls of the mental maze, and as you leave, remember, the maze is real. But so is the path out, dot. It is not a single path. Not a straight line, but a spiral. Each time you walk it, you walk a little higher. See a little further. Forget. Then remember again, dot. So when you wake tomorrow, carry this spiral with you. You are not your first thought. You are not your first emotion. You are the space between them. The quiet watcher behind the noise. That is your true shape. Your real mind. The present path is not a destination. It is this moment, again and again, always. Returning, always beginning, dot. Thank you for walking it tonight, dot. Until next time. Stay awake. Stay curious. And stay watching.